So I am pleased to introduce someone who's been a successful entrepreneur and now is a senior executive at a big company that people have heard of, but almost everyone underappreciates just how successful Adobe is. If you take Snap, Dropbox, Workday, and Snowflake combined, they're worth significantly less than Adobe. So we're going to hear from Scott Belsky from Adobe, and we're hearing a talk that's only been given once before. So here, with no further ado, is Scott. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's good to be here. So I guess we're going from health and longevity of people to health and longevity of cultures to, in this case, health and longevity of products is, I guess, how I would probably put it. And I've been a product obsessive, like many of you, for many years. I always kind of write down the things I learned the hard way or the things I learned from others. And then just recently, I kind of challenged myself to cull some of this stuff and figured I'd share some of these things with you. Hopefully 2 or 3 resonate. The rest don't matter. Real quickly about me. So I've been in the creative industries since, I guess, 2005, bootstrapping a company called Behance. And the effort of Behance was to just help organize the creative world at work. Behance is now 40 million portfolios and people powering their own personal websites off the platform as well. But we were actually a bootstrap business originally. We sold paper products to kind of get ourselves going, and the idea was let's be mission-centric, organize the creative world, but medium agnostic. Let's do it through any way, shape, or form we could. But of course, it was also just a way to pay the bills. And there were books and conferences and other things along the way that helped us kind of build the connection, with the creative world that we were trying to ultimately serve. And then this led to the acquisition by Adobe in late 2012. So it was right around the time that Adobe was transitioning from software to service and had the opportunity to join and think through, okay, Creative Cloud, like how do we turn this into a set of services? How do we bring these flagship products to the web, to mobile? How do we bring connected experiences throughout the products? And it's really been a blast. Also think about new segments like 3D and immersive. Now the rise of AI. We launched our generative model family called Firefly recently. So it's been a lot of fun to, in that context as well, think about product experiences and the types of things that ultimately engage people and help products grow. And then as an investor or product advisor or board member, working with a number of other product teams over the years, to help them think through things like onboarding and first mile experiences and that sort of stuff. And so there we go. So you got a book as well. One of my other passions has also been helping product teams through tough times. And I find that the classic kind of idea that a product team sort of just starts to iterate and the products just get better and better and the teams and the companies get better and better is, of course, wrong. It's an extraordinarily volatile journey where you have to endure the lows and optimize the highs, not only in how your team functions, but also in how your product is performing. And that's always been really fascinating for me. So that's a quick intro. So I put this together thinking, OK, what are some of these essential insights that product leaders that I really respect kind of swear by? And the first analogy that kind of came to mind for me in this question was, was this scene in The Matrix, where suddenly, everything just kind of clicks for Neo, and he realizes that these like cute little bullets in the air are just like these curiosities, and like picks them, and suddenly he understands how everything works around him. And so with that metaphor, I was thinking, what are the things that are like that for the product leader that might be useful again to share and discuss? What's the equivalent? And so let's start with, I'm just going to jump through a bunch because we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to impart a few ideas. So one is that data is a compass and not a map. And I think this is something that we are all data obsessed, of course, and I think that a lot of startups sometimes fail when they put out an MVP that is sort of in the wrong mountain to climb per se, and it has such a gravitational pull towards staying whatever their first version was. It's very hard to deviate, more than just a few iterations. And of course, vision is the part that helps you find the right mountain. A great example of this is my friend Dylan Field at Figma, and I got to sort of watch this from many vantage points over the last 10 years at Adobe. But here is someone who said, people are ultimately going to trade precision and performance for collaboration. and I'm going to start to build something on the web that actually compromises that precision and control for years and years, because I believe that the puck is going towards a place where collaboration will be more important in certain disciplines of design. And I think for the product design segment, that was an incredible insight and a good example, because I don't think that anyone that had the data of how designers were working would have ever bet the house on that. And that, I think, is one great example. So that you should only do half of what you want to do, I think, is one of those other kind of matrix-style realizations that you probably learned the hard way after cultivating products for many years. Behance, when we launched, was a much more complicated product. We had this thing called groups. We had a tip exchange where creatives would come and share tips with each other. We had a work-in-progress capability where people could share snapshots of work in progress. We had all these features. And if I were to be honest, I was probably just trying to hedge ourselves. I didn't know what thing would take off. And so we kind of launched V1 with so many things. And then what we realized is that when we started to kill a few of those things, we killed tip exchange, suddenly engagement on project publishing went up. I was like, oh, let's try that again. Let's kill groups. And lo and behold, engagement on project creation went up. And so the key KPIs were served ultimately when we were reducing the scope of the product. And since then, I've been very insistent with the products I've been a part of and also advising over the years to just kind of really be very cynical about every additional tab and every additional feature, even have this notion of one feature in, one feature out. If you're looking at the roadmap, don't only compare things on the roadmap to be in the product, also compare them to things that are already in the product. And sometimes consider taking something out of the product once you put something new in the product, is, again, another thing that a lot of product leaders sort of learn the hard way. This notion of half of the options, half the tabs, half the the offerings, it sort of compounds your chance, a product market fit. And I love the analogy of the bonsai cultivation, practice, where every sort of brand new, beautiful bud cut strengthens the trunk. And it's hard to kill these new things, especially those of us who are founders who get really excited about innovation and new capabilities, or people like me who want to hedge ourselves. So I think that another sort of realization is defying what I like to call the product life cycle, and the importance of obsessing over human tendencies to do so. So what is the product life cycle? Well, the product life cycle is this classic Silicon Valley narrative of a simple product launches. Everyone gets so excited about this simple, less cognitive load way of doing something that they always have to do in their lives or at work. And so users just flock to the simple product. That simple product then starts to take all these new users for granted, needs to monetize, caters to the requests of power users, and it becomes more bulky and enterprise grade, et cetera, et cetera. And then lo and behold, users flock to simple product, and this cycle repeats itself over and over and over. This is great for investors, but how do we, as product leaders, defy this, right? How do we make sure that we don't fall victim to this? And this is really about thinking about the product integrity of the product, and also recognizing that every new cohort of customers is different. And this is another thing that I see a lot of teams struggle with, is they nail the first mile experience of their product when they launch it, and it's performant and they're happy with it, and then they move on. And they forget that, of course, the new customers of a new product are a cohort of very willing and forgiving customers. Later cohorts of new customers need an entirely different first mile experience, and they won't be satisfied. And so the first mile is something that's constantly iterated. And so when you're doing that, you have to constantly realize, I think the best product leaders have this sort of sensibility, that all people, all of us, in our first 30 seconds of using any new product, are lazy, vain, and selfish. Now, of course, we can get through that and build a relationship with the product over time. But initially, this needs to be a real critical grounding. What do I mean by this? Well, we're lazy in the sense that we don't want to read anything, learn anything. We don't want to endure any sort of training. We don't want to go through bad onboardings, instructional videos, all this sort of stuff, anything more than a line of copy. We're busy, right? We're busy. We have other things distracting us, and we don't have the tolerance to endure all of this sort of stuff being thrown at us to educate us. And so how do we navigate this? Well, first, we should always show rather than explain. And so whenever you have the tendency to have videos or text that people have to read, How can you do things that sort of with tooltips or whatever? That's certainly one of those realizations once you test a lot of these different ways and approaches to onboarding that can help people navigate by just showing them. But the only thing better than showing them is actually doing it for them. And so this is really where the templates, the very presumptuous defaults of what someone should actually see first and do first, smart selection, and of course, AI infusing product experience these days will really change this notion of doing things for the customer as opposed to showing, as opposed to explaining. We learned this in products like Photoshop over the years, where we introduced capabilities like neural filters, for example, where suddenly things you'd have to do and take an hour to do and lots of different knobs and dials, you could suddenly just do with a slider using AI, and that was sort of an awakening for us. We have a lot of stuff launching tomorrow in Photoshop on the generative AI front that you should see that will also further that insight. And similarly, all these top-of-funnel products these days that start with a template, that start with a prompt, I mean, these are all ways of doing things for customers that help them feel more successful more quickly. One of my favorite sayings of all time for product is from my friend Dave Marin, who some of you probably know, who always likes to say the devil's in the defaults. And I say this all the time with teams. Whatever people actually get by default is likely going to determine their entire customer journey, and certainly their success at the top of the funnel. And it's so ironic that we oftentimes spend the final mile of our experience building a product thinking about the customer's first mile using the product. Like, why are we doing that if, in fact, it's all about top of funnel and getting people the right defaults and all these sorts of things? If you can just get most of those people through, you're probably in the top 1% of products anyways. Like, why shouldn't we sort of flip the model and focus more on that first mile? So we're not just lazy, we're also vain, right? We're vain in the sense that this better make us look good and really quickly. I always use the term ego analytics with teams, especially on the consumer side, but this also applies to enterprise products as well. People have to feel good about themselves using the product in order to continue using the product. And how do you do that? You have to make sure that you're merchandising to customers their own progress, their own success. It's fascinating when you look at products like Instagram and others, and you look at kind of login behavior in these products. What you'll often find is that you think that people are going to the products to see their friends' content. But what they're oftentimes doing is they're going to the products to see who saw their content. And so login behavior goes up after a new post because you want to see who saw your content. You want to see how they're reacting to your content. And yet, we still make products thinking that it's kind of for the primary purpose and not the secret, real purpose. And so in some ways, as we think about our products, I mean, this applies to enterprise products as well. There's one company I was working with where it was sort of like a procurement product. And they realized that one of the killer features was the ability for procurement analysts to download a editable, beautiful, formatted spreadsheet that they would then edit. They would download, they replace the logo with their own, put their name at the bottom, and hand it to their boss. And they would feel so good. They would be like, this is a great thing for my career. Look at this amazing report I now develop, and that ended up engendering their love with this enterprise product. And that was like a little side feature that they played with. In Behance, we've played with this for many years, dashboards of ego analytics to help people recognize that their work is getting discovered and appreciated and that sort of thing. So we have to make sure that we're actively investing in the product's ability to merchandise our customers' awesomeness, to our customer, and remembering that, progress begets progress. When teams feel like they're making progress in a product, they continue to make more progress. So lazy, vain, selfish, and then Ben, only initially. I believe that we build relationships with customers over time, but initially, we need to make sure that we benefit people super quickly from spending minimal amounts of time. This is all about kind of ROI, if you will. I remember in the early days of Pinterest, before Ben had a network effect of any kind, it wasn't really about discovering interests. It was actually about chronicling. It was like your own pinboard. It was your own collection. He was a collector growing up, and he nailed this utility of collecting digitally, and he brought this product to market at a time when Delicious and other bookmarking services really weren't image-centric. And so his insight was, let's make sure that people get that utility first, and then, of course, they have discovery later. Other sort of selfish value propositions, the get paid faster insight that Square had over the years, the 2 lines of code value proposition of Stripe. Interesting, right? I mean, I remember when our developers at Behance adopted Stripe, And it was really just because they wanted to get this done more quickly. And they saw an alternative to what we currently had, and it was so easy to rip and replace. And so this selfishness value proposition really resonated with them. And this is sort of a side point, which is that all too often we separate the copy development in products from the product and design teams building these experiences, especially in big companies. And this is one of the things that drives me the most nuts about being in a big company, is that copy is considered like a different discipline, when in fact a lot of us know that product experience is as much copy as it is pixels of design, as it is all the other mechanics of our products. And so this should be born or governed to some degree, in my opinion, within the product team. All right, so let me get to a few others here. So we need to get customers to talk about their problems and not your product. And one of the only focus group we ever held for Behance in the early days was a group of creative professionals in the room, where we pitched them this idea back in, I would say, 2006 or so, of a social network for creative professionals, like a professional network. And universally, they said that's a horrible idea. We've got DeviantArt, we've got MySpace, and we've got LinkedIn, and we've got our own portfolio sites. The last thing in the world we want is yet a fifth place where we have to maintain and update and whatever else. And we said, oh, great. Well, what are you struggling with then? And of course, the answers were, well, I never get attribution for the work that I actually do. Agencies take the credit rather than me. My portfolio site's always out of date. It's sort of long list of problems that they were suffering in their career. And that was one of those moments where I realized, gosh, you should never be really asking them just about your product. When you ask customers about your product, you're testing familiarity, which is actually good, by the way. I mean, you should test familiarity with customers. But when you're doing something new, when you're trying to kind of change your space, you really have to be more focused on problems, which is also why I like to say that empathy for the customer typically outperforms passion for the solution for founders. I think that products growth is really interesting. We all talk about PLG these days. I think it's interesting that we, as customers, we typically don't talk about a product doing what we expected it to do. We typically talk about products doing what we didn't expect them to do. And I think that there's all sorts of fun, interesting examples over time. I mean, when my team adopted Slack, we were using HipChat at the time, if you remember that. And then a small group of our engineers were like, let's use Slack as a coffee room thing, because it had really great animated GIFs integrated into Slack, and it was funny. And then that novelty, of course, preceded utility and helped it grow over time within the organization. And so I oftentimes think, we don't prioritize on product roadmaps with our logic novelty-driven features, and yet sometimes these are the things that drive adoption more successfully. And in terms of people sharing things that they didn't expect, I don't think there's any better example than Tesla with their infamous or famous $0 marketing budget, maybe until just recently on Twitter. But this is an example where people talked about the car doing things that they didn't expect, and that sort of grew word of mouth. And as a product leader, I was always like, how does this really work? Is there an engineering meeting where people are talking about things like safety features and performance features, and someone in the back is like, I have an idea. Let's do Rainbow Road on your dashboard when you double-click that whatever. And someone was like, oh, that's a great idea. We're going to prioritize that. But actually, that is what has to happen for you to prioritize features that get people to talk about the product doing things that they didn't expect. And whether it's little funny stickers and things in various products, I mean, I've seen this work many times over the years. And it's something we need to value if we're going to value and prioritize PLG in our products. So I oftentimes am asked about product reviews, and as I work with teams and products around our organization, and also a lot of the teams that I work with, when we do a design or product review on the startup front, there's always three questions that I'm asking myself at every single screen of every journey that I ever go through. And it's basically these three questions. It's how did I get here? What do I do now? And where do I go next? Or what do I do next? And I think that this is kind of the ultimate, when I use the term object model in products, this is how you test the integrity of an object model. Because again, if customers are lazy, vain, and selfish for some period of their time, or constantly distracted by their other experiences that they're being inundated by when they're using your product, whether it's an enterprise product or a consumer product, they are constantly losing navigation. It's like they're constantly being driven somewhere, dropped off, and then told, okay, figure out your way home. And they need to constantly be oriented around. And so this is the type of thing that those questions, I think, are ways we can start to battle test and pressure test whether the breadcrumbs are there, whether the defaults are right, whether it's clear what to do next, whether you can actually go home if you have lost, sort of sense of where you are. Which is another reason why I believe that a prototype is worth 100 meetings. And the number of times I've been in meetings, I'm sure you have as well, where people sort of debate issues and questions and product priorities, but then once you get a prototype in the room, it's like the hot knife through the butter of bureaucracy and BS. Suddenly everyone sort of nods and gets aligned. They also quickly get aligned around what doesn't make sense. And so this power of the prototype, I think, is one of the things that I've always tried to optimize for in my own career in the process, which is to say that I do believe that great product leaders, their secret weapon is great design leaders, and partnering with these people and empowering them at the right time throughout the process. Increasingly, I think this is true, that every choice, and certainly in the API world that we live in, every choice is made at the interface ultimately, and a lot of the technology and even the providers, underneath are going to be rapidly and continue to be disrupted to some degree. And I don't think that's any different, by the way, in the AI world. I think that the interfaces are just changing, but the interface game in some ways remains the same. And so, you have to think about the disruption at the interface layer, and if you agree with that thesis to some degree, you should be empowering designers in your organization disproportionately throughout the process, because that's really where you're playing to some degree. Another point about that is just the perception versus reality as it relates to a performance of a product. Another Pinterest story was when they started to suffer from scaling in the early days, and Behance also went through this as well, where it just like something had to be replatformed, something had to completely be refactored, and it took a lot of time, and customer experiences were suffering, and designers came up with a solution, which was let's preload images in this way, let's give the synthetic sense of faster performance, which actually worked for a period of time in both instances. And it was a design breakthrough, not an engineering breakthrough, that increased perceived performance. And so again, it's another superpower that I think a lot of product leaders realize when they get designers in the room, sometimes when you don't expect. A few other quick things: that you have to prioritize grafting talent as much as hiring talent. A lot of people find those superstars, and then they are on board. You have to suppress the immune system of your team to some degree to let a new, really, a seasoned leader take hold and bring their best practices in without being rejected by the immune system. As a leader, I always remind myself of this, and this is also something I've learned from working with Shantanu at Adobe, is that you can only expect what you inspect. And the way you all allocate your energy in inspecting things in your organization, you really have to tightly correlate that with whatever you expect your people to do, especially the things you're trying to change in your product and how people are working. And that the best new products ultimately take us back to the way things once were. And so this has become like a cardinal belief of mine, and a litmus test as I look at all new technology, is I'm always asking myself, does this somehow take us back to those days that we all kind of secretly or instinctually, biologically even long for? This notion of walking around and everyone knows you. Local florist welcomes you. The butcher knows your favorite cut. The restaurant knows you're a vegetarian, or whatever the case may be. And does marketing tech and the AI products now that are driving hyper personalization, does that in some weird way just take us back to these days that we long for? And LinkedIn, with personal connections and everyone being able to meet someone through like a warm connection as opposed to a cold connection. Obviously ChatGPT interfaces. This is natural language. This is kind of back to the way things once were. Skipping all the stuff that's happened in between. And I think it's a great litmus test for technology to invest in, and also for technology that we can build as product leaders that resonates with our end user. Does it take us back in some weird way to the good old days? And that's why I think that And this is, we talked about the longevity and health of people, and we talked about the longevity and health of cultures, and I started saying we're talking about the longevity and health of products. But in essence, all of those three, this presentation and the two before it, it's all about people, right? And I think that as a product leader, I've also, as I hire people, I often try to think about the psychological aptitude of a product leader, because ultimately, a lot of these things we just discussed, a lot of the product decisions that you all make every day are boiled down to a deep understanding and empathy for those natural human tendencies, like being frustrated in the first 30 seconds, like talking about something because you didn't expect it to do what it was advertised to do in a good way, those sorts of things. To build the products for the future, we obviously have to really understand the parts of the past that we long for, because that's a real sort of, it's like a hack, if you will, to drive engagement and to build great engaging product experiences. And that ultimately, and I find this really interesting, whenever you open up a product or use a product, you can kind of tell a lot about the product's DNA or the team's DNA behind it. You can tell which organizations don't talk to one another. You can tell maybe where the fiefdoms lie in a company from the products you're actually using. And of course, as earlier stage companies, and some of you have, remarkable fast-growing later stage companies, but you're still in this mode where you can collapse the stack where you need to, and you can ensure that you're delivering this experience that people feel is well coordinated behind the scenes. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree as it relates to who a team is and what a product ultimately becomes. Thank you. All right.